Hello everyone. So my name's Mike Tamlin. I am a Django core developer, but I'm not actually going to talk about Django at all today, which is unusual for me. About 2 years ago, got a new job as the lead developer at a small tech company in Oxford called PhotoCrowd. We write a photography contest platform, so lots of people upload their photos. All of the photos you'll see in the background of the slides are photos from our website. If you're interested in photography, I strongly recommend you check it out. There are some gorgeous photos to look at, and please join in. It makes our user figures look good. But this was the first time that I'd been involved in a sort of leadership position in the tech company, and we got some more funding in, and so we were going to grow. So I needed to find some more people. Which then led to the question of how do you find some more people? You can go and ask a recruiter, but even when you ask a recruiter, at some point, you're still going to be sat with someone who's come in for an interview, and you've got to work out what you're going to do with them. So I'm not an expert. I've hired about half a dozen people. Most of them have gone quite well. Not all of them, but most of them have. This is what works for me, and it's probably more relevant, I think, from my background for people working in small companies rather than the people who are doing the interviews in big companies. But I hope there are ideas that are applicable to everyone. So, what makes a bad interview? What do we want to not do? Well, the most important thing from the company's perspective is that you don't employ the wrong people. You want to know that the person who's going to come in and work for you is going to be able to do the job, and they're going to be able to do the job well, and that they're going to stick around. Because hiring costs money, and it costs time, and it's expensive, and it's difficult. So if you make the wrong decisions in the process, and you have to start from scratch, it's cost your progression as a company quite a lot, which in a startup is a really big deal. You don't have a lot of time, and you don't have a lot of budget. Often, interviews can be very formulaic. You can have a really fixed idea about what you want to have and what an interview is supposed to be like, and it might be based on some interview that you had 10 years ago, and you can be very specific about what you want, and you miss a lot of good candidates who would fit your company better. Allow people to be flexible. It's not just about what's bad for you. It's also about what's bad for the interviewee. If you're a small company, especially if you don't live in a big city, so you're in a reasonably small tech community, and you have a bunch of people who you get in, and they come in for an interview, and they have a miserable time, and they don't feel like they've been able to show off what they know, and they feel that you haven't had a great thing. And obviously, it's really bad if you do completely the wrong things and you get sued by them for, discrimination. You don't really want to do that. But even without having done things that badly, they can go away thinking, oh, I hate that company, don't like them, I tried to go for an interview, they asked me some really stupid questions, I didn't know the answers, and they didn't give me the job. If you can send people away, even the people who don't get the job, and they're like, well, I didn't get the job, but they seem really interesting, and I'd kind of still like to work there if I get a bit better at the stuff that they tell me I need to get a bit better at, then their friends are going to have a positive impression of the company, they're going to have a positive impression, and it's going to be easier for you to hire the best people in 6 months' time, in 3 years' time, as your company grows. I've heard of a few people who've gone for an interview, read the job application, gone through the whole process, been given the job, turned up on their first day, and discovered that their job is nothing like what they thought it was going to be. That's not great either. If somebody comes in with an expectation of what the job is that doesn't match what you need them to do, they're going to be miserable. They're probably going to leave. They're probably going to kick up a whole load of fuss before they leave, and it's not going to go very well. And you need to make sure that your interview process isn't biased. You don't want to be biased against diversity. As has just been mentioned, that's actually illegal. But you also don't want to be biased against a bunch of other things that aren't illegal. For example, what background people have, and in particular, the amount of free time they have. If you've got a junior developer position and you're looking for an entry-level person, and you have one applicant who is a middle-aged single parent with 3 children, and you have one applicant who finished university 2 months ago and is currently unemployed, and you ask them to do a test at home, who's going to do a better job? Probably the person who's got nothing to do with their time outside of work, because they're going to have more time to invest into it. That doesn't mean that they're going to be a better candidate, it just means they're going to do that thing better. So that's all the bad stuff. What makes a good interview? Well, kind of the opposite of everything I just said. You want to get good staff, and what is good staff depends on the company. It depends on who you are and what your company ethos is and what job you're recruiting someone for. For me, I want someone who's personable. We're a small team, we all work closely together. I need to be able to get on with them well and chat with them well and feel that we're able to get on. I want a learning engineer. I'm not just interested in what you are now, I'm interested in where you're going to be in 6 months' time. I don't care if you don't know things, if you're going to be able to pick them up quickly and get better at doing things. Especially for junior developers, that's really important. I need them to have the right attitude to perfection, prioritization, and criticism. So they want to achieve perfection, but they understand that there might not always be the time to do so. They're able to choose the aspects of the role of the job description that they need to do. That's really important to us. We're building a product. We've got a million ideas that we can do. The question is, what can we do to prove whether this is actually going to be effective and whether our users are going to like it? And how do we get that done quickly so we can move on to the next thing and then come back to that if it worked? And they need to have the right response to criticism, so that if you say, I don't like how you've done that, they don't throw their toys out the pram and storm out the office for half an hour. You can actually have a good conversation and improve how they're working. You want a fair process, you want to suit the role that the interviewee is doing, and you want to make it a little bit adaptable, especially when you're recruiting to a small team. Accept that the people who apply and people who you might interview might not always be exactly what you had in mind. So try and build flexibility into your process. It also allows you to use roughly the same process for junior developers, senior developers, intermediate developers, front end, back end, ops, whatever. You can use a similar process and it keeps you more in the loop of what you're doing. So you need to design a process. What role are you interviewing for? What are you going to get them to do? It's also important to think about who's going to be involved. The worst thing that can happen as a new employee is you come into the office and you sit down and they show you to your desk and you're surrounded by people who you've never seen before. Everybody sat around you you've never encountered. All the people you're going to work with on a day-to-day basis you've never even met. You then immediately feel like you've got to impress all these people around you. You've got to make sure that you can prove to them that you're good. If you met those people in an interview and you go, oh, hello again, I've seen you before, you know you've already impressed them. You impressed them enough that they gave you a job. So you're in a good state of mind to start with, and it gives you a more relaxed process. It also means that those people are less likely to turn around to the hiring manager and go, who the hell's this idiot that you hired? I don't like them, they're rubbish. So it saves the time later on. It's also good to involve in a small company some of the non-technical people as well as the technical people. Anyone who they're going to work with, it's the project managers, the designers, the CEO, depending on the size of your company, get them to meet the candidates as well, at least a certain distance through the process, so that they can find out whether they're going to get on with them and whether they think they're going to work well. So, here's my process. There's a level of advertisement. Sometimes that goes through recruiters, sometimes it doesn't. Where I can recruit from my local community, I try to do so. We then go through a screening process. So there's some initial contact and then a pre-interview. That might be a phone interview, it might be a meet-up for a coffee or something like that. There's then an actual interview process. That should include some coding. It includes some chat about the company in general. It includes a review of some coding, and it includes a general discussion about technical topics. And then there's a feedback stage. I don't believe in companies who say we don't give feedback on interviews. They're just doing that to try and cover themselves. If you're a small company, you shouldn't be doing that. It's not necessary. It's much better. If you can't come up with a good reason why you haven't hired that person, why have you not hired them? You can give them a reason. Initial contact. Unless you have to, because your CEO says so, don't require a big, complicated process. If somebody gets in contact with you via an email and sends you a CV, that's fine. You don't need to have this whole aptitude testing and screening processes and a formulaic form with a million dodgy application questions that they've got to fill in. If you are using a recruiter, ask them to redact the demographics early, so you don't even necessarily see people's names, and certainly to redact any other information. It allows you to do the initial screening process without hitting any of your unconscious biases. Sometimes, however, it may be advantageous, especially in small companies, to not do that, but to deliberately try and select to get more diversity in your team. You can do that to an extent. You have to be a little bit careful about how you do it, and you should do it early in the process, not late in the process. If you're deliberately hiring someone late in the process for a particular demographical reason, then everybody else is being discriminated against at that point. But early in the process, you can do a little bit of it just to try and keep a bit of diversity in what you're doing. Look for positives, not for negatives. When you're going around stalking someone on the internet, as you always do when you've got a recruitment in, you go and look at their GitHub profile, you go and look at their LinkedIn profile, you go and look at their Twitter, whatever it is. There's an opportunity for those people to show you what they can do, but those things not being there doesn't necessarily count against them. I don't have a LinkedIn profile. You're not going to find out anything about me on LinkedIn. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not going to be a good person to do the job. Someone may not have a GitHub profile because they don't have the time for open source because they have other hobbies. They might have a great GitHub profile, in which case you can learn something about them, but not necessarily everything. You know, if you find someone's got a wonderful Stack Overflow profile, that might be that they've got a helpful nature, that they know lots of stuff, that they love helping people out, or it might mean that when they go to work, they spend all their time sat on Stack Overflow answering questions and not doing any work, which might mean you don't want to hire them. When you get to the pre-interview stage, you want to try and keep the process short. You've got maybe 15 minutes and a maximum. I personally give them a choice of whether they want to come in in person and meet me, whether they want to have a chat on the phone, whether they want to have a video conference, whatever. You're aiming to get a feel for their background and experience and why they're interested, and you give them an opportunity to ask some questions. I do find it's relevant here to ask some very basic, straightforward yes/no questions. This is the one time that I'd use some pretty closed questioning. Simple facts that you'd expect people to know. This screens out the people who tell you that they've been doing this for 3 years, and oh yeah, I've been a Python developer for 10 years. What's the difference between a list and a tuple? Blank face. Well, chances are you might need to know something like that, and you might need to have some idea of the concept of immutability or mutability. And if you tell me you've been doing this for 10 years, I'm a bit surprised that you don't have that. And give them an opportunity here, if you can do here, explain how the rest of the process is going to work. Even if you got halfway through this conversation and you think you're not going to get in contact with them, tell them when you're going to get in contact with them, and if you do, what's going to happen. Personally, I ask a reasonable amount of my interviewees, and I ask them to come in for half a day. I don't require them to do anything at home outside of work. I just require them to come in for half a day so that we have plenty of time to assess them fairly. Do not ask them to write production code. There are some companies who will send you some work, which is basically the work they've got from the client, and ask you to build the front end to that website at home, and basically they're asking you to do 2 days worth of work for free. Don't go and work for those companies, and don't be that company. It's not fair, and it's not on. If you're going to do that, employ them on a short-term contract instead. Personally, as I've said, prioritization is a big part of what I do, so I deliberately give them a relatively short time frame. I give them an hour and a half, and I give them a project which would probably take them 2 days to finish. Maybe a day to finish if they were really good. But I make sure to set the expectations that here's the core of the problem, and here's what I expect you to have some idea, some good handle on, and here's a bunch of stuff around it that you can look at doing. Do what you can do, or do what you think is interesting to do. Because then you learn a bit about what they prioritize. About an hour into that hour and a half, I'd have a quick chat with them, check they're getting on, check they're not lost, and help them to find out what they're doing and make sure they've got time left to do things. Try to find a problem which gives them an opportunity to solve a problem, to make some decisions, to show off what they can do and what they can't do, and make sure that you should be able to think of at least 3 different ways that you could approach this problem. And 2 of them you might think are a bit rubbish, and 1 of them's the way that you would do it. That's fine, but you need to have multiple ways in your head that you could approach this problem. There shouldn't be one and only one answer. I'll get on to why in a minute. As I said, if you ask them to code at home, you'll find out how much spare time they've got, not how good they are at coding. When I get them to come in, I ask them to bring their own machine so that they're comfortable with what they're doing. They've got their own text editor, minimal setup, for a front-end position. A plain text file that will open into a browser will be fine. You don't need to have any server set up. And allow them to install any tools or libraries that they think will help them. Try and make yourself available during this process so that you can talk to them and find out what's going on. And they can ask you questions. At this point, I send them off for the company chat that I'll get to later, hopefully, for about 15, 20 minutes with somebody non-technical, and we get as many of the technical team as we can crowded around the screen, and we go, I like that, don't like that, don't like that. Don't tell them that. You don't want them to know the nitpicks. What you're looking for here is what did they prioritize? What have they done? What are the positives of what they've done? What are the negatives? Have they written tests? Have they written documentation? Have they written style? But the important thing to remember is that what they've done is not what you're assessing them on here. It doesn't matter if what they've done isn't great or isn't how you would have done it. What you're looking to do is to talk about it, get the review feedback, and see how they respond to that review. Because if someone's not great to start with, but you can make them better, they're a brilliant person to hire. Pick up on a few things that they've done. Try and find something that you think they've done well, something that you think they haven't done so well, and something that they haven't done at all. And you want to talk about each one in detail, so you can ask, why have they done it that way? What other approaches could they have thought of? And if they can't think of any other approaches, give them one of your other approaches to that problem, and then ask them to think about which one they could have chosen and why one or the other might have been better. It's okay to disagree with them at this point, and if we've all worked in the technical team before, and one of us has said, oh, I think we should be done this way, and someone else has said, I think it should be done this way, and you have a discussion and you sort it out, and it gets done one way or the other. It's okay to be different in your opinion, but it's important that that discussion feels like a discussion that you could imagine having every week with this person, and that it goes well, and that you feel like you come to a conclusion that you're both happy with. You don't want to have someone who goes, okay, if you want it that way, I'll do it that way, even though I don't understand how that way is. That's not going to help you in the long term. You also don't want someone who's going to throw their toys out the pram if they don't get their way about how it works. It's important to be a little bit careful about interview pressure bias here. Some people will perform very well under this sort of circumstance, some people won't. And so don't be too judgy about how much they've got done. Sometimes we all have off days where we get a bit stuck and we're not quite sure what's going on, but you're interested in what they're going to learn and what they're going to pick up. Most of the time, you're going to recruit someone who knows less about the technical area that you work with than you do. You know your own website. I mean, I have an advantage that I'm being a core developer. I know a lot of things about Django. So when I'm recruiting a Django developer, I can find what they know and I can go 2 steps further than that and teach it to them. A lot of the time you can do that, especially if you're recruiting junior developers, and it's how they respond to that teaching which is very interesting. That's a key part of how the Oxford University interview process is designed. They want to find out what you know, they want to find out what the next thing is, and teach you that and see if they can teach you. Because if they can teach you, you're going to get better, and you're going to learn, and you're going to turn out to be a great person in 2 years' time, or 6 months' time. Once you've done that, you want to move on to some questions. Now, I think we've all had interview questions to which there is a very clear and obvious correct answer. And you ask the interview asks the question, and you either go, well, this is the answer, and they nod and move on to the next question, or they answer the question and they go, and move on to the next question. The hmms are even worse, because you don't even know if you've got it right or wrong. But that doesn't really tell you anything as an interviewer. You know whether they know that really specific piece of knowledge or not. It doesn't tell you what they think about it, what their impressions are, what their opinions are, what else they can know, what else they could do. So try and find questions that are very open-ended, that can build into a discussion about something. Ideally something that you know about, ideally something that they might be able to have an opinion about, rather than just a piece of knowledge about. And the great questions, the really good technical questions that are open-ended, have a straightforward answer that anyone could be able to answer. Even if they're reasonably novice-y, 6 months worth of experience, you'd expect someone to have an answer to that question. You could probably give a 2-hour talk about this if you really wanted to. So here are some examples of questions that I use. There's some sort of general ones at the top. What's the most interesting piece of code that you wrote recently? You'll find out what they're interested in, what they like. You'll have an opportunity to talk about things. You'll be able to see a bit of enthusiasm from them, hopefully. One of my favorite ones here is, what's the difference between a form and a model form? A perfectly legitimate entry-level answer to that question is the word model. One's about models, one's just a form. Great. Done. Okay, so why do you use one and why do you use the other? When would you use that? Are there instances where you would use a model form, where you would use a plain form, even though you're dealing with a model? Why would you want to do that? When is that a good idea? When is it not? What's your opinion about model form? Do you like model form? What do you know about how it's written? What other ways could Django have approached that problem? I mean, I could give a 2-hour talk on this topic. Probably will do at some point. But it gives you the opportunity to build something up, but it's not a question that when it's initially asked, a junior developer is going to go, I have no idea what any of those words mean. Hopefully, when someone's done a Django tutorial and been working for 6 months or so, they're going to know what a model form is and what a form is, and they're going to feel like they can offer something to that question. It allows people to feel like they know something, but allows you to find out a lot more about them. Backtrack briefly to this company chat. Ideally, this wants to be with someone who's not an engineer. They want to get the opportunity to talk to someone non-technical in the company and get them to talk about the ethos of the company, the background, the direction that you're going in, exciting product features you want to build, clients that you're excited to be working with, whatever fits with your company, benefits you get, the socials you have, all of that kind of stuff. That's important to the life of a company, especially a small company. And it might be that you do a lot, and it might be that you don't do very much, and that's fine, but they need to have the correct impression of what it's going to be like, and you need to feel that they're going to fit in with how your team works. If you've got a company of 300 people, then this might be not so relevant on the big scale, but they're probably going to be working within a team of 20 or 30 people. So you get them to talk within that team of 20 or 30 people. What do they like? Do they go out do they have board games days at lunchtimes? Do they, go out to the pub regularly after dinner, after work? Whatever it is they do, and you can't judge them on whether they're going to do that or not, but you find out a little bit about them, and more to the point, they find out stuff about you. You want people who are going to fit into your company to want to accept the job afterwards. There's nothing more disappointing than finding someone who you think is great, offering them the job, and then they go, I think your company's a bit boring, I don't want to work for you. That's not really what you want to have happen. And give the interviewee lots of opportunity to ask you questions. Finally, give them some feedback. When they leave from the interview process, give them an indication of when you're going to get back in touch with them. It might be tomorrow, it might be next week, it might be next month, but having some sort of expectation rather than, we'll be in touch. Because if you're applying for jobs and you've been into this interview and you've got this great impression and you really want to have got that job, and then you don't hear anything for 10 days when you were hoping to hear something in 2 days, do you apply for another job? Do you give up? What do you do? Because if you know that it's coming, then you can kind of hold off other offers who you might have got for the one that you really want, and it allows the interviewees the flexibility to do what they want to do. Try, whether you're going to accept someone or not accept them, that you tell them some positives about them, about what you think of them, and some negatives about what you think of them. The people who you're going to pull in, you want them to know what you think they need to work on, because that's what you're going to do in a review regularly with them anyway. With the people who aren't going to get a job, I've had someone, in fact, who came for an interview very early on when I started, went away, didn't get even through the screening phase, and I explained why I thought he didn't have the sufficient knowledge for the salary rate that he was asking for and so forth. And he went away and he'd been doing a bunch of learning, and he met me at a meetup about 6 months ago and said, hi, I've been learning this and this and this and this. I'm not quite there yet, but let me know when you've got another position open, because I'd quite still like to come and work for you. That's a great thing to have happen as an interviewer and as a company, that even the people who you've rejected are still wanting to come and work for you, and they're trying to improve themselves so that they can get a job at your company. That's a fantastic thing to achieve if you can. And all it required was about 30 seconds at the end of a 10-minute phone interview for me to go, okay, so this is quite good and this is quite good, but I think you need to really concentrate on this, and I recommend that you go and learn go and have a look at that if you have the time, and see if this is what you want to do, you're going to need that sort of experience. It only took me 30 seconds to do, but he had a really positive impression and actually went away and did that. So, always remember, you're interviewing a person. It's about them as well as you. It's not just about you getting the best person. You need to make sure that they have a good experience. Design the process for the role in question. There's no point asking someone to invert a binary tree on the whiteboard if all they're going to do is write Django models and views all day. It's completely unrelated to what they're doing. If you know what someone's core job is going to do, try and make the coding assessment and try and make everything that you do with them localized to what they're going to actually do, assuming that they have the knowledge to do it. If they don't, do it with something that they do have the knowledge about. Give the candidate the opportunity to show you what they can do, show you what they do know, not just what you're hoping that they'll be able to do. Because you might discover that you get someone who come in who is kind of all right as a junior developer or whatever, but they've got great QA experience, and you didn't even know you wanted a QA person, but actually, that's great. We'll hire them, and they can be really useful for helping with that, so long as they're happy to be involved. And even if it's just sharing their expertise, that's really wonderful. Be honest with them, and be honest with yourselves about how good you think people are, and give yourself the time to make the process fair. My name is Mark Tamlin. As I said, all the photos that you've seen are from our website, so thank you very much to those photographers. Apart from that one, that's one of mine, so it's not as nice as the other ones. You can find me on GitHub, Twitter, and on PhotoCrowd.
Okay, so we have about 4 or 5 minutes for questions. Yep.
So I have a couple of questions.
Yep.
The first one is, how do you deal with language agnostic and team agnostic hiring? For example, we don't really hire people who are only Python developers. Maybe we hire people who are C or C++ developers. But for example, you mentioned that maybe you ask them Django stuff or what you are doing. So how do you deal with these kind of cases? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's difficult if you're recruiting someone who's got a very, very different background to what you've previously got. I mean, it's difficult to review their code. You don't know whether they've done things well, whether they've done some things badly necessarily in terms of the detail. It's quite easy to, like, if you're recruiting for a web company or something, then you can come up with a concept which is applicable whether you're writing it in PHP or you're writing it in Django or you're writing it in whatever. If you've got someone who's applying for a job who's got no experience in anything like what you're doing, that's reasonably rare. So this is where I say it's important to try and be flexible, to allow them to show off what they do know. I certainly, like when I went to my very first interview, first out of university, as a junior developer, they asked me to send them some code that I'd done for fun, not for work and not for university, just something I'd done in my own time, which is a reasonable expectation of a student who wants to be an engineer. They've probably written something. And I sent a crap version of Tetris that I'd written in C. And it was nothing to do with the job I was doing, but they were able to take that code. They actually went and learned a little bit to understand how to run it, put a bit of effort in, and then we were able to have a conversation about it and how the code I'd written was in fact rubbish, and they taught me something that would have made it better. And they were interested in how did I respond to that teaching and did I learn it well. And they gave me the job, so yay.
So do you agree with asking any like data structures or algorithms like generic questions for such kind of roles? Or?
I would suggest that depends on what they're going to do. If someone on a regular basis is going to be writing complicated algorithms or dealing with complex memory requirements or that kind of thing, then yeah, those sort of standard questions are really useful. But if you're employing someone who's going to work on a CMS agency website, when are they ever going to need that knowledge? You know, I don't understand bitwise operations, but I can write code for Django, I can work with the ORM, and I still don't know how to write C, and probably never will.
I have one more small question. So you mentioned a very small pre-interview test that's like 15 minutes or something.
Yep.
But like, won't that cause a lot of people coming in for the face-to-face, and it takes up a lot of time and expense?
I don't do that necessarily within a company setting. That's sort of, I call it a pre-interview rather than a phone interview. It's kind of the phone interview. Most people I will speak to them on the phone, or I might meet up for them for 10 minutes at coffee at lunchtime or something if they happen to work around the corner and it's convenient, then I'll meet up with them in person. I like to give people the choice of how they want to do that, because some people feel much more uncomfortable on the phone or some people feel much more uncomfortable in person, so it gives them a little bit of preference, and it means that it's not too much of an effort. You've screened out the people who you think don't meet the role at all just from looking at their CVs.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to this person because they're closest.
Okay. Thank you for the talk. I really enjoyed it. You mentioned a set of values and ideas that you should apply on interviews, and you also mentioned that you sometimes went through recruiters, which are third parties. So how do you make to involve these third parties so they adopt this kind of values and way of communication and way of dealing with the person on the other side?
So even when I've used recruitment agencies to help find candidates. The good recruitment agencies won't force something. If you go and say, here is how I'd like to run my interview process, they won't force you to not talk to people. In fact, the recruiter who we used thought we were excellent value clients because we did half of his work for him. Now, you may not have the time to do that, especially if you're a company that's well known and you get hundreds of applications for each role. Then you may need to use their services more in order to filter it down, and it becomes a cost-effective use of your time. But it's not difficult for you to ask them certain things of them. After all, you're paying them to do something. It's reasonable that the good people will allow you to work with them. There are more recruitment agencies to choose from than you can shake a stick at, so find the one that works for you.
Okay, technically we're to time. I guess we can do one more question if you want, or we can stop.
I'm happy to take questions afterwards,
okay,
that's fine.
There was the person over here I just ignored, so perhaps it would be...
Hi.
Hi.
Quickly.
How do you balance avoiding bias with hiring personable people?
By personable people, I don't necessarily mean people who fit a particular demographic or people who are like me. A personable person is someone who I can actually have a conversation with. They might be 20 or 30 years older or younger than I am and they come from a completely different background. I can equally find someone who's the same age as me, speaks the same language as me, has the same background as me, but when I talk to them, I'm like, yeah, I'm bored of talking to you already. And it's hard to find that out before you've actually had a conversation with someone. But if your interview process doesn't really involve any conversation, it's just a bunch of questions with answers, then you don't really find out what they're like at all. So you won't find out completely what someone's like because they're in an interview and there are different pressures and so on, but it gives you an understanding of, is this someone I'm going to be able to chat to or not? Thankfully, we live in the Python world, so most people you meet are lovely.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.